I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and if 20 years ago you had have asked somebody what Jaguar stood for, they would have told you all about really traditional sedans and long coupes sporting V8 or even V12 engines under the bonnet. Over the last decade or so, Jaguar, under the ownership of Indian company Tata, has really tried to reinvent that image, becoming a much sportier brand and a really interesting alternative to companies like Mercedes, BMW and Audi. And that transformation has been pretty successful. In fact, over the last 3 years or so, they've tried to apply those sporty ethos to SUVs. And back in the day, a Jaguar SUV would have been unthinkable. But in fact, the F-Pace is a pretty good car, largely because it's based on the XE and XF platform. It's all aluminium. It drives really, really well. Can those same ethos now apply to a smaller SUV? And that's the car that I've got here with me, the new E-Pace. The E-Pace may look like a shrunken down version of the F-Pace, but it's actually not. It's based on Jaguar Land Rover's older platform that they inherited from Ford. And in fact, small luxury SUVs are all the rage with these brands at the moment. So picking them apart is increasingly important. So is the E-Pace ready to take on cars like the GLA X1 and Q2? Well, that's what we're up here on the New South Wales North Coast in order to find out. Inside, the E-Pace takes inspiration from a number of other cars within the Jaguar Land Rover stable, but most importantly from the F-Type, which is Jaguar's halo sports car, and you can tell that from this grab handle down here, which is upholstered in nice soft material and also nicely stitched. However, apart from that, the E-Pace's dashboard presents as functional and handsome. So every E-Pace gets this wide 10-inch in-controlled Touch Pro system, although the base model doesn't even get navigation. You do have to step up to the S in order to get that feature. Nor does the base model get leather seats, it has fabric. The S model is the first to introduce grained leather, which is Jaguar's lower end leather finish. If you step up to a higher model of E-Pace, one of the top models, you can actually get the perforated Windsor leather, which is their really nice supple leather, and we'd definitely be tempted to do that. This particular car is an SE, so it has nice features like 14-way adjustable seats and 3-position memory for both the driver and the front passenger, which is pretty generous. You also look forward at this nice steering wheel, which is nice and soft and supple, and digital gauges in the SE as well. And in fact, it's a nice car in terms of ergonomics. Where the seat it sits to where the steering wheel is and where this new trigger style shifter, which finally makes a return to Jaguar product, everything feels like it is where it should be. Material quality in this car is generally pretty good, so there's a nice soft touch dashboard up here. Tops of the doors are pretty plush. If you go looking for hard plastic, you will find it down here where your leg rests and up here on the dash, although no one really touches this anyway. In terms of practicality, it's pretty good. So there's a tray ahead of the shifter, which is pretty deep. There's a really nice deep central bin where you'll find this car's 2 high-powered USB ports for the front seats. There's more of those in the back. There's also a secondary tray here between the seats, although you have to remove that in order to access the cup holders. But the door bins are nice and big, so they can accommodate a decent-sized water bottle. Here in the back of the E-Pace, the doors open nice and wide, which will make it relatively easy to fit a child seat. That's also helped by the fact that there's nice exposed ISOFIX points in both of the outboard seats. Closing the door with a nice heavy thunk that makes you feel like you're sitting in a solid car. How's the space for an adult? Well, I'm 6 foot. I've got just enough headroom, despite the fact that this car has a large fixed panoramic sunroof. My legroom sitting behind myself is okay, and toe room is just about average. If my seat was sitting a little bit further back, like for someone with a more aggressive driving position than me, then the room back here would start to feel a little bit tight, but it's definitely comparable or a little bit better than something like an Audi Q2. Fitting 3 people abreast is going to be better in this car than in some others because the E-Pace is quite short but wide. And in terms of amenities back here, it's pretty good. So you do get a fold down center armrest with 2 cup holders. There's rear air vents in this car, and this particular one actually features 3 powered USB ports down here underneath the air vents, which is something we always like to see. Open up the E-Pace's electric tailgate, and behind it you'll find a pretty practical cargo space. Jaguar says there's 577 litres behind those rear seats. I'm not sure if that entirely visually adds up for me. I think that it might go a little bit higher than the window line, which is the traditional way manufacturers measure their boot space. But that said, it's a really good boot. It's a nice square space. There's no load lip, so you can slide heavy suitcases straight in and out. And there's some clever features back here, like a net in order to stop delicate items from moving around, a separate storage compartment over to the right. There's a bit of a dinky sort of load cover here that doesn't lift up with the rest of the tailgate, but there's actually a second hidden piece just up here which does lift up with the boot, which means that any valuables won't be visible once we close the tailgate. So what's the new E-Pace like to drive? Well, despite the fact that this car doesn't share all that much under the skin, apart from engines, with the XE, XF and F-Pace, Jaguar have managed to engineer a really characteristic feel into this car, and that starts with the steering, which really does feel like the steering rack in other Jaguar products. It's nice and quick, it's direct, and it's feelsome. Plus you do all of that through a really nice steering wheel, particularly in R-dynamic cars, which also gets gear shift paddles behind the wheel. If you don't get an R-dynamic car, there's no paddles at all to control the 8-speed automatic gearbox in this car. However, R-dynamic or not, there's still a broad choice of engines within the E-Pace lineup. There's 3 diesels and 2 petrols. All 5 of those are 4-cylinders with turbocharging. The car we're in right now is called the P250. This is actually a 4-cylinder petrol, 2-litre in capacity with a turbocharger, making 183 kilowatts of power and 365 newton meters of torque. And we think that this particular petrol will be the more popular of the 2 petrols. It joins a halo variant called the P300, which makes 221 kilowatts of power and 441 newton meters of torque. On the diesel side of the ledger, there's 3 models available, a 110 kilowatt version, a 132 kilowatt version, and then the D240, which is the Halo diesel, making 177 kilowatts of power and 500 newton meters of torque. Have you got all that? Because there'll be a test at the end. What I will say is that even with the 2 most powerful engines, either the D240 or the P300, you'd never accuse the Jaguar E-Pace of being overtly fast, and that's because it's heavy. JLR's aluminium-based products are nice and light. However, the models that continue to sit on the older Ford-sourced platform, including this new E-Pace, are actually quite porky. And with the diesel engines, it can tip the scales at about 1,900 kilos. The petrols save around 100 kilograms, but for a smallish SUV, that's quite a lot. And it means that you actually kind of need one of the 3 more powerful engines, so this P250, the P300 or the D240, in order to make this car feel adequately quick. That aside, most of the E-Pace's other driving dynamic characteristics are actually pretty great. So on turn-in, there's definitely an initial sense of mass because at the end of the day, this is a heavy car, but then it settles itself. It's nice and planted through long sweeping corners. There's plenty of grip, especially on the higher end, faster models, which carry Pirelli P0 rubber. And then the P300 and the D240 have a feature called the active drive line, which can actually send 100% of the engine's torque to the outside rear wheel. So although this car starts life on a front-wheel drive platform, it actually mimics a rear drive experience pretty well in those faster engines. If you don't have either of the flagship engines, then instead what it does is it can send a variable amount of torque to the rear wheels, but not 100%. And it uses torque vectoring by braking. After our relatively shaky experience, to put it lightly, driving an F-Pace on 22-inch wheels, which delivered a pretty unacceptable ride quality, it was good to drive the E-Pace up here on some pretty rough and rutted road surfaces and on 20-inch wheels, and find that Jaguar have actually managed to make this car ride really well. There's definitely a slight sense of initial jar on the huge wheel packages on the E-Pace, but by all accounts, this car is comfortable to drive. It rides over dodgy road surfaces nicely. There's a little bit more vertical movement after a big drop in the road surface than we would like, but in the corners, there's essentially no body roll, and this car is really, really nice and planted. It's also quiet on the P0s, as usual with that tyre. There's quite a bit of road noise, but there's not really any wind or environmental noise. And then on this car's Goodyear Eagles, there's not even that much road noise either. So it's a pretty refined and luxurious experience in the cabin. Fuel economy is okay. In the D240, so the most torquey diesel, yesterday we were getting in the low to mid 7s with spirited driving, and then swapping over to this P250 petrol, more like in the 9s, but that is with hard driving. If you settle down a bit, it'll deliver decent fuel economy because these Ingenium engines Jaguar have developed in-house are pretty economical. And on the safety front, the E-Pace isn't too bad, so all cars come with autonomous emergency braking and lane keep assist, and then higher up in the range you'll find additional safety package included, which delivers features like adaptive cruise control and blind spot monitoring. So those are my first impressions of the first ever Jaguar E-Pace. This is definitely one of the leading premium small SUVs. It's good to drive, I think it looks great, it's got a nice interior, and most importantly, it does make you feel like you're driving something special. Sure, in some ways I wish this car was based on Jaguar's own aluminium platform because that would make it a bit lighter, faster, and generally more dynamic, but given what the brand had to work with here, this is a pretty great result. If I was looking for an Audi Q2 or a Mercedes GLA, I'd definitely be giving the Jaguar E-Pace some attention.